And welcome to week 5 of our CART webinar. Uh, we've been learning a lot, hopefully. We've been going through a lot of news, and that task itself can be quite overwhelming. It can be taxing, it can be tiring, especially on a busy news week, busy news day. They all seem to be kind of busy right now, and I don't know how much time you regularly spend looking at the news, but it's part of it's a really big part of what I do, and so it's a bit unavoidable. And I hope everyone takes mental health breaks to not read the news and not be online from time to time, because it can get real heavy, and it can get a little bit depressing or a lot depressing, especially when it seems like you're the position that you are in and what you do as educators and folks trying to teach other people about good information. It can feel like a gut punch when you just see a bunch of misinformation spread all around, and it can feel like an uphill battle. It can certainly feel like one of my favorite misinformation reporters, he tweeted something that it sounded kind of despairing, like, what if misinformation has won? What if the liars have won? And it's easy to despair from time to time, and I think that's okay to do that momentarily. But then we got to get back up and keep fighting, because that's all there is to do, right? And the fact that people are sometimes unable to tell the difference between good information and bad information, what that indicates is that that folks are looking for leadership. They're looking for people to guide them, and that space can be filled by folks who don't have good intentions, or it can be filled with folks who do have good intentions. So it's up to us to gird ourselves and jump in there and do this kind of hard work, because there are a lot of other people out there, and it is definitely a fight worth fighting. All right, so today I want to jump right into rating some articles as soon as possible and leaving some time for questions, because we haven't done it. We've done some interaction. I've really enjoyed the last few sessions. We've gotten your feedback on rating articles, and gotten some consensus. I want to continue doing that, but I also want to hear more from you and get some questions, things that you might be wondering about implementing this in your classrooms. And it doesn't have to be necessarily just about the bias rating aspect. We can talk about anything that we've covered so far in our CART webinar series. So let me just give a quick recap. If you haven't been on our previous webinars, they're all available they're all recorded, and they're on our website. It's the webinar series 1 through 4 so far. The first session was just an introduction to the CART content analysis rating tool platform, like how to use it, what comes with it, and just an overview of what this webinar series would be about. And then on that second session, we went through how to know what's true, and an introduction to rating the reliability axis of the 2-axis media bias chart. On the third session, we rated some real articles for reliability. We went through our simple version of our methodology, and then a little bit more into our full methodology. And then last week, our fourth session, we did some simple ratings for bias. So today I'd like to get into our fuller methodology for bias, and build off the things that we learned and discussed last week. Okay? All right, let's get into stuff. And this is a great week for selecting crazy articles from across the bias spectrum. We always have fertile ground for selecting really crazy news stories, unfortunately. Yeah, everybody's like, oh, I know. I mean, I could pick some more from today. I saw somebody said that they opened the news and they saw that the GDP was like down 9.2%. largest contraction ever for a quarter. And also Trump proposed, postponing the election, and Herman Cain died from COVID. And he's like, then I close the news. Understandable. But let's dive into it ourselves. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And we're going to take a look at, well, let me make sure this is up here. Oops. There we are. Okie dokie. If you haven't seen this before, this is the interface for our content analysis rating tool. This first top line is the view that your analysts, i.e. your students, get to see. And then this second line is the coordinator menu. Coordinator and teacher are interchangeable in our terminology. So you get to see both. And where I am right here is this, I've gone to the analyst home. Analyst homepage has a list of articles. So this week, I have a bunch of articles in here from the past few weeks that we've dropped in there as part of our CART system. We put in 6 articles every week from across the media landscape. We try to pick some good ones, some terrible ones, some right ones, some left ones, sometimes more so, sometimes less. And the topics over the last few weeks have really ranged. So LGBTQ civil rights ruling at the Supreme Court was in June. Tearing down statues, Confederate statues during protests was another topic we covered in June. In July, we got into another Supreme Court case, this time about a Louisiana abortion law. In the next week, there were some articles about Bubba Wallace, the only Black NASCAR driver, and a flapper around the Confederate flag and a noose. And then the changing of the Washington football team's name, which used to be the Washington Redskins. Last week was about Portland protests, and this week we've got some articles about the video that was about a group of doctors claiming that there was a cure for COVID, that masks were not needed. This was tweeted by Donald Trump Jr. and by the president, and it was pulled by Twitter. So we're going to dive into those articles today. So how I got to that is by going to rate this article. And we're going to take a look at ones left, right, and center. Then let's kind of go in that order. Okay, let's go. All right, I won't tell you what this is. I won't tell you if it's left, right, and center. We're going to come to that decision ourselves together. Yay! All right, and it's easy if you're familiar with the sources, but you may not be familiar with all the news sources. That's certainly something that we do by design. We don't, there are hundreds and hundreds of news sources. So you all, being savvy news consumers, will probably have some familiarity with some of these names, and your students may not. Especially the younger they are, the fewer news sources they're likely to be familiar with. So we've got an article from the Daily Beast, and I'll ask you to take yourselves off mute here in a moment. And remember, we're going to focus on our bias rating. Because of this topic, because the underlying topic is this viral video that is full of misinformation that got pulled down by Twitter, we will discuss the aspect of misinformation, conspiracy theories, and we'll get into that a little bit. I have some resources for you on that because it's kind of unavoidable. But let's focus on the bias aspect of these ratings, okay? So we're gonna end up with an overall left to right bias score, but what we want to do in our full methodology is go through a few different factors. Just as a reminder about why we do this. Remember, we have a simple rating methodology, and for a lot of students, that's going to be appropriate to stick with that for a little while. for many students, just the very idea that some news sources are more reliable and less, and some news sources are more left and more right and more neutral, that's going to be enough to handle. And we want to get into those discussions about why, about why those things are, why students make those judgments about those news sources, just for overall reliability and overall bias. But as you get into further discussions, you will come up with these reasons why your students and you want to rate articles more left or more right. So the easiest thing to start with is this middle one. I'm sorry they're not in order. We're eventually going to change that around, so you can go, top to bottom here. But language is really the easiest one, okay? When we talk about language, we're referring to the language that's used, the terminology that's used to describe political positions. For example, I got a chat here. Okay. Let me, I'll get to that question in just a second. So language, we're talking about political position, how we characterize political positions like pro-life versus pro-choice. Also, how we characterize political opponents. Do we use adjectives and adverbs, insults, pejorative terms? Those are all things that fall under language. And those are easy to detect. So even if you haven't read a lot of other articles, which is important for the comparison metric, and even if you're not familiar with the political positions, as a lot of political novices will not be, you can at least start to get a sense of the for and againstness of something in an article just by language. So that's a great place to start, okay? So language is a first place to go. Then political position is the next easiest one to go, because then you can really start to dive into what's left and right politically, and if your students don't know, you can help them. You can give them guidance as to what's left and right currently in our country. And then the last one, the squishiest one, is comparison. Comparison often requires you to have some knowledge about the political issues, knowledge about other articles, so it's easier to do it the more articles you have read. Then you can do an overall rating. So those are the things we're going to keep in mind: language, political position, and comparison. And let's read this article. We'll read, it's not super long. Let's read, I think we can read all of it. Okay. Daily Beast. Twitter pulls wildly misleading COVID-19 video shared by Trump. And this is what we call the lead. Sometimes it's spelled L-E-D-E, sometimes it's spelled L-E-A-D. I think the usage, technically both are correct. So the lead is out of line, or the category of whatever, this is what they chose to go with as the next most important thing besides the headline, okay? Out of line. And here's a picture of Trump in a mask in a lab or something. All right. Twitter has pulled a video of doctors making false claims about the novel coronavirus after it was shared by President Trump. Late Monday night, the president stumbled across, all right, well, we're going to hover over this and see what this links to. If you take a look at the bottom, whoop, it disappears. But you direct your eyes to the bottom of the browser where it says where that link is. Yeah, I'm pointing to it here, right over there. Okay, that's a link to another Daily Beast article. So take that for what it's worth. Sorry, I think we had a chat here. Okay, yeah, please feel free to start commenting in the chat section about this. Awesome. Okay, so he stumbled across a viral video that showed fringe doctors touting the controversial anti-malarial drug hydroxychloroquine as a cure for COVID, quote, cure for COVID, and doubting the effectiveness of wearing masks. The claims made in the video directly contradicted the advice of Trump's own public health experts, but despite that, he slammed the retweet button. All right, so we've got some language that we can point to, right? If we're just focusing on language, we've got out of line, wildly misleading, and then stumbled, slammed, absolutely. So Trump's page shows a disclaimer where the retweet once was reading, "The tweet is no longer available." A Twitter spokesperson told CNN, "We're taking action in line with our COVID misinfo policy." Facebook and YouTube have also confirmed they removed the misleading video. Despite what Trump appears to believe, clinical trials have found that hydroxychloroquine has shown no real benefit in treating coronavirus patients and it has potentially deadly side effects. Okay, again, we'll get into, oh, that was it. Short article, okay? Calling him Trump, fringe doctors. Okay, good. So let's talk about, so there's lots of stuff in terms of language here, right? So even if you didn't know if this was a more left or more right, you have something to go on here. As far as political position's a little tough on this one, right? So there are certain things that you can characterize as more left or more right, which seems kind of odd because this is not like a traditional political position. So the things you can pull out for a political position, one are like is being pro or against a politician of a particular party, right? That's kind of the easiest one. So being like for or against Trump, or for or against Hillary Clinton, for or against Barack Obama, Joe Biden, so those give you kind of a proxy for left and right, not a perfect proxy, because remember, like we covered last week, being, saying something negative against Trump isn't necessarily always going to be a left position, just as saying something negative against Hillary Clinton back in the 2016 election was not always necessarily a right position, okay? So there are gradients of it. That's one thing you could judge. However, given our current polarizing environment, we kind of manage as Americans uniquely to make everything a left-right political position, okay? Like being for or against hydroxychloroquine. Now, 6 months ago, was anybody for or against hydroxychloroquine? Like, had anybody really heard of it? Unless your family member has taken it for like lupus or malaria or something like that. I mean, that's not really it wouldn't be really considered a political position, but it kind of is now, which is sort of nuts. I liken it to being like for or against some other drug that can provide some benefits, but also has a lot of severe side effects. Like if you're saying I'm pro Humira or I'm against Humira, like just some other random drug that's like not at the center of COVID, right? That would seem kind of silly, right? But my theory on this, if you'll indulge me, is that the world is complex. There's a lot of information that's coming at us all the time, not just about the pandemic, but about like everything around us. So the pandemic is complicated. COVID is complicated. Treatments for it are complicated. Information is changing all the time, and folks have a hard time dealing with all that information. Okay, to cope with it, a lot of folks look for shortcuts, look for heuristics to deal with things. And one of the easiest shortcuts is my team for this or against this? So as soon as somebody, if you identify with a team or a tribe, a political party, and someone high ranking on your team says, we're for this, it's easy to just take that shortcut. Like Trump says, I like hydroxychloroquine. I think it's great. It could really cure a lot of problems. Jair Bolsonaro, who's the president of Brazil, says the same thing. Hydroxychloroquine's the greatest. And if you want to just kind of filter out and try to make sense of the information that's being presented to you, one of the easiest ways is to be like, I like Trump. Hydroxychloroquine's probably great. Everyone who's against it's probably just against Trump. You can just kind of line up everything into like one bucket or another. Now, is that a great way to deal with medical information? No, it's terrible, right? Is that a great way to deal with uncertainty and complex information in general? No. So I think that one of the main benefits of having your students go through these exercises and get into the weeds and get into the details of articles is to have them get comfortable with dealing with complexity, with, tracking down facts, going down these, these links, the rabbit holes of links, to try to verify as much as they can, to gather as much information before just saying, I believe one thing or another thing, very simply. Okay? All right. So let's see. Okay. Having a position on hanging chads in the 2000 elections. Yes, that's excellent. It's not a new phenomenon, but it's like a, I think, exacerbated phenomenon where pro-mask, anti-mask, it just pro and anti everything. It's crazy. All right, so let's rate this. Okay, well, and if experts in the field agreed with him, it wouldn't be political then either. Yes, yeah, exactly. So that's, if you take a contrary, like if it was just like medical consensus, is if everyone was like, we're going to just go with consensus of what doctors say, and what doctors say is a little complicated, but we're just going to go with that, right? No, we don't do that these days. Language skews left. All right, let's go ahead and rate this. Let's get a rating here for language. What do we think? We've got a couple of votes for skews left. Okay. All right, we got a 25, which would be like hyperpartisan left. All right, somewhere over here, which is based on language. What do you think? Left, skews hyperpartisan left. All right, sounds like we're gaining a consensus of fairly left as far as language, right? Okay, now as far as political position, so things that we can identify as like positions that are kind of being advocated by this article is like, Trump said this and it was wrong. The video is wrong. Hydroxychloroquine is not a cure for COVID. There's potentially dangerous side effects. Like those are the sort of the things you can poke out of here as political positions. So what would we say in our current political environment? Where does that land? It skews left. So it's not very extreme position, right? Like the consensus of most folks is that, yeah, that's true. Like this was a false video, false information. So it's a shade left, but not drastically so, right? Okay, so let's put that over at skews left. Good. And comparison. So this one's a little tougher because we haven't read any other articles about this subject. So when we'll have a better basis when we read other articles about the subject, but just given what you know about the news landscape, what you've read previously, are there articles out there, do you think, that would have described this more harshly, less harshly, more straightforwardly, in comparison to like how it could have been phrased? Where do you think this would land? Could have had less loaded language. Okay, so kind of in the same area, yeah, right? Like there's some pretty harsh language. Maybe some of it's deserved. It certainly could have been more neutral. If we're looking at neutrality as a standard, it certainly has some non-neutral language, and I'm sure others by comparison are more neutral. Okay, so let's put it in this general ballpark. So average, the political position, individual factors. Okay, even if it is deserved harsh language, isn't that supposed to be more up to the reader to determine? Absolutely, right? So that's why we have these ideals of reliability and neutrality. So reliability we've been over quite a bit. It's how much can you rely upon an article to be truthfully, factually, widely, thoroughly informed about news that is important to you and to others. That's our standard for reliability. But when it comes to bias, most of us have a consensus that the fairest news is going to be like the most neutral, like the minimally biased, appropriately biased, right? Okay. So are they equally weighted? Yes. Good. Yes. These are, unlike the reliability, where there's a little bit more there's a little bit more discretion between the individual factors. Bias tends to come out to kind of an average. Okay, so would we say this is a skews left? Everyone, are we comfortable with this rating of skews to fairly left? Okay, all right, good. Submit. Thanks for your input on that. Let's look at something from the right. So this is, all right, news punch. You know, we get some wild news. We get some wild titles of news sources. News punch is an interesting one. All right, but let's Twitter suspends Trump Jr.'s account. I think it's this one. Okay, it is. Let's read. Okay, Twitter suspends Trump Jr.'s account for sharing video about hydroxychloroquine. We're just gonna read this whole thing. There's a picture of Donald Trump Jr. going like, what? Not in response to the Twitter pulling it down, right? This is just a photo from something else. It says the lead is Twitter has given Donald Trump Jr. a 12-hour timeout from tweeting. We got a comment, headline seems factual. It does. Okay. The suspension came after he posted a link to a video containing what Twitter said was, quote, misleading information about COVID-19. Trump Jr. violated the social media company's misinformation policy by sharing a viral video of medical doctors talking about the use of hydroxychloroquine, capital hydroxychloroquine, to cure, I think that's a typo for cure, the coronavirus. Okay. And 2 dots. All right. So 1 typo I can live with, but there's 2 typos already in like 4 lines. So I'm getting a little irritated here. Yeah, misinformation policy in quotation marks, as though it might not actually be one. Totally. Okay, and this happens later in this article as well. So the quote, "This is a must-watch. So different from the narrative everyone is running with." The president's son. Oh, it's another typo. President should be capitalized. It should. There should be an apostrophe here. Son said about the clip. Let's see. And one is really confusing. Oh, I love your comments here. Just keep them coming. I'm going to keep reading. The president's son said about the clip, which has been removed repeatedly from social media sites. RT reports. So RT is the hyperlink. We're going to check that out in a little bit. Okay. As something that we are referring to. This is citing. All right. RT reports. President Donald Trump. Spelling mistakes relate more to reliability than bias. Yes. Okay. RT question mark. So this is Russia Today, if you're not familiar with it. If you're not familiar with Russia Today, you should be, because it is a, we'll get there in a second. Okay. We'll go visit that site. President Donald Trump tweeted the very same video. He has spoken of the anti-malarial benefits in the past, though studies have shown varying results. And the tweet was removed, but he appears to not have been suspended like his son was, and he has tweeted since then. All right, so what do we have here? We have some quoted tweets embedded in the article. That's something we want to take into consideration. Who are they tweeting here? So you've got, we don't know who Andrew Sarabian is. Maybe you do. I didn't know who he was, but it says, breaking. Twitter and Jack have suspended Donald Trump Jr. for posting a viral video of medical doctors talking about hydroxychloroquine. Big tech is the biggest threat to free expression in America today, and they're continuing to engage in open election interference, full stop. Okay? Screenshot of the Twitter suspension or lockout. So Trump Jr.'s tweet, gosh, so many misspellings, has been removed from his page as well, and he will not be able to use his account in full for the next 12 hours. He can still send direct messages to followers, but cannot retweet, like, or post his own new tweets. Twitter said through a spokesperson that this is not a suspension, but instead a temporary lockout. To end the lockout, Trump, I don't know why they're also putting, italics and quotation marks, but I'm really on this like spelling and grammar and punctuation thing now that I've noticed a few misspellings. The same message can be found on the president's Twitter page in place of his own tweet that shared the video. Video itself was originally streamed by conservative news outlet Breitbart and featured doctors proclaiming themselves to be America's frontline doctors, talking about the benefits of HCQ, hydroxychloroquine. The mistakes make my head hurt. I love your comments, you guys. United States of conspiracy. The credentials of some in the video have since come into question, which is an understatement. And the video has been actively purged from social media pages for spreading misinformation about the current pandemic. Trump Jr.'s Twitter lockout has only added fuel to the fire for people already accusing social media companies of bias against conservatives. If you don't think this is about control, you aren't paying attention. Blaze TV host Sarah Gonzalez tweeted in reaction. Despicable, wrote political pundit and strategist Brian Dean Wright. All caps. All right. So here's another quote tweet by Dan Bongino. I'm not sure exactly how to say his name. I know he is a Fox News contributor and radio host. Saying WTF, which does not stand for, well, that's fantastic. Stands for something else. Okay, and then also quoted is Ben Shapiro, who's the conservative pundit. He owns a site called The Daily Wire, podcasts other media properties as well. The evidence on hydroxychloroquine obviously contradicts the statements in this video. Also, this policy is insanely overbroad. Talking about Twitter's policy. It could have barred pro-masking content in early March when the medically accepted information was that masks were just for medical professionals. So it seems to state that, what officials said about masks in March is comparable to what this video is claiming about cures for COVID, okay? So, all right, last month, U.S. Attorney General William Barr announced a broad antitrust investigation into big tech companies, including an examination of their online practices, with potential actions likely dropping before the summer is up. Okay, so a few things here. There's our emotional responses from those quoted. A retweet of the post from above goes to reliability. Quotes are from tweets and are not journalism. Punctuation is used for extreme effect nowadays, like all caps for text and DMs. Tweets from conservative sources only. Threat is a term in there. You pointed out, David. All right, where did the story go? It started out as about Donald Trump Jr., and now it's about an investigation into big tech, and ending with a nice veiled threat from Barr, not from him, but that he will bring retribution. Yeah, so there's all these things going on in here. Now, imagine that you are not aware of the underlying facts here. Like, imagine you're just a new student, and this is and your reading comprehension skills are not to the level where you would notice the italics, the misspells, the misspellings, the punctuation errors, and you're not, you just don't have a high level of comprehension. What are some things that we can look to just in terms of bias? Okay, we'll get to reliability just because there's obviously a lot of reliability issues in here, but this is something that we want to tease out and get students used to looking at for bias, because bias and reliability are highly correlated. They're not perfectly correlated, unfortunately. So you can't always just say something has loaded language, therefore it's unreliable. It's just not as simple as that, which is why we rate both reliability and bias. But what can we look at? So yes, we are going to look at the hyperlink to RT. But let's talk about language. How's the language here? Where would we rate this? Just for language. And remember, the language you can rate includes the stuff that's quote tweeted, okay? The stuff that's brought in, like if tweets are brought in to support the point of view of the article, we should absolutely take that into account. Okay, yeah, skews right. Big tech, good. That's a terminology that is a boogeyman terminology. Now, your students may not be familiar with that. So whenever there's terminology that you identify as potentially biased, you want to point that out. Like big tech, there's, you know, big tech is something that it's a conservative boogeyman. Like the general, um, the general accusation is that, and like the whole, um, like the background theme of this article is that Twitter is bad because it's censoring or limiting the free speech of conservatives or people who disagree with mainstream media or something like that. So big tech is one of those terms. But again, your students might not be familiar with that. They might be not be familiar with like the fact that big pharma or big oil on the other side would be left-leaning boogeyman to describe the right. Okay. All right. So skews right. All right, let's go with skews right here. I agree. Okay. So how about political position? So the things that we can pull out that are political positions, we try to pull out like 2 or 3 things. So being pro or anti a politician. So in this case, Donald Trump and Donald Trump Jr. are kind of the focal points here. And so you could point to the fact that they're being attacked. And um, like that this article is saying that Twitter is attacking them, and it's got like a defensive posture of Donald Trump and Donald Trump Jr. So other things like the position on hydroxychloroquine, it's certainly not, it's a little bit more temperate towards hydroxychloroquine than the Daily Beast article. So let's get some ratings on political position. Okay, sources, yeah. Donald Trump Jr., faux politician, making this partisan. Okay. Sources making it right about 20. All right, so 18 to 20, 20 plus. All right, sounds fair to me. How about comparison? Compared to the other article we read, compared to articles that could be more neutral about this, what do you think? All right, oh, I'm going to address this question. Can we use the selected tweets along with the language of the article? This is language selected by the author. Yes, especially if they're using it to support their point. If you've got a source that's got, that's more just presenting the, like, multiple sides of a story to say, well, this is what one side said and this is what the other side, and appears to be taking a neutral stance towards it, that could be more neutral. But what's often the case is that you'll have more tweets from one side than another, or only tweets from one side than another, and you should absolutely take that into account for bias. Okay. All right. Right. 10, 20 plus. So comparison, right? 15, 20. Okay. So we could have more, we could have stuff that's more right leaning, right? We could have stuff that just like kind of totally ignores the fact that this is misinformation. I mean, they put misinformation in quotes, so that wasn't great, but it's not like, we could certainly imagine some articles that are just like going off the rails about how terrible this was, that this was taken down, right? So I think that's a fair comparison rating. Let's give this an overall rating over here. All right, let's go back though, and um, let's go back there and look at the RT tweet. This is really interesting. Okay, RT. Okay, so all right, Trump Jr. locked out of Twitter account for sharing controversial video defending HCQ as COVID-19 cure. Okay, so this is a must watch, different from the narrative. Oops. Okay. All right. So from here, let's go from here on. It says, President Donald Trump tweeted the very same video. He has spoken of the anti-malarial benefits in the past, though studies have shown varying results. The tweet was removed, but he appears to have not been suspended like his son was, and he has tweeted since then. Sounds familiar. Yes, they just stripped out some of the RT text, absolutely. So it's also plagiarism. So same tweet from the same guy as before. This looks like it's very, very similar. So you have the video itself was originally streamed by conservative news outlet Breitbart and featured doctors proclaiming themselves to be America's frontline doctors. He's got the same quotes about like misinformation in italics. Um, if if you don't think this is about control, you aren't paying attention. Blaze TV host Sarah Gonzalez tweeted in reaction, despicable. Yeah, so this is like copied straight from, it looks like the other article was copied straight from this RT article, including the bad grammar and italics, right? So that kind of stuff tends to go to reliability, but if you're not familiar with RT, it's something you should be. So it's a Russia Today. It is all in English. It's made for English audiences. They have a TV channel as well. You can get on cable, and it's owned by, it's funded by the Russian government, and it's widely considered a propaganda arm to kind of inject polarization, like anti-America, pro-Russia sentiment into our media diet, U.S. media diet. There have been some instances of some like well-documented instances of outright misinformation and disinformation, but there's kind of this mix on the site where there are some news stories that are sort of innocuous, and they have a number of very qualified journalists from U.S. journalists from with good reputations from other news sources, and so there are certain articles that are really highly credible, and then there's a lot of articles that are just a little skews right, but tend to be kind of polarizing without necessarily being directly right or directly left. Like they're not extreme right or extreme left. They're just like kind of anti-America, like anti-government. Okay, so like beware of links to the source. Like analyze it very carefully. Okay. All right. So how do we know? How do we know the other article lifted from RT and not the other way around? I don't. I'm assuming that just because News Punch is a worse source generally, just from my experience. They have like a handful of contributors and writers. Like I think only 2 or 3 I've ever seen write for News Punch, and RT is a really big organization. So timestamps. One has a link and the other does not. Yep. Yeah. So good clues. You all are really good at this. So I'm excited for you to go and teach the youth. All right. This last one, we won't go through and rate it necessarily because I think we can kind of get the picture because it's from BBC. This one, it says, the lead is reality check. Hydroxychloroquine, why a video promoted by Trump was pulled on social media. Picture of Trump. Says President Trump has promoted the use of hydroxychloroquine. All right, the taking down of a viral video by social media companies has reignited a highly charged controversy in the US over the use of the anti-malaria drug hydroxychloroquine. In the video, members of the group America's Frontline Doctors promote it as both a preventative measure and as a cure for COVID-19. The World Health Organization, who says there is currently no proof that hydroxychloroquine is effective as a treatment or prevents coronavirus. The video is broadcast online by right-wing online platform Breitbart, viewed over 17 million times on Facebook. It was also shared on Twitter by Donald Trump and many of his supporters. I kind of love the dry straightforwardness of it, the chock full of facts, the straight delivery of expression here. That's just my personal preference. So I'll cut to the chase and say that this would be rated fairly neutral here. But because I want to get to some other things and some other questions, when it comes to rating subtle bias of news sources that are all very good. Like if you're comparing BBC and Washington Post and NPR and CBS, ABC, like you can find little subtle left and right bias uh, indicators, but that's that's like a game to be played by people who are already very news savvy. Okay, for folks that you're just being introduced to the world of like how to tell what's true, we want to make sure that folks can tell like the BBCs and CBSs of the world from the news punches of the world. Okay, so we want to make sure that that's like the most important thing to deal with first. All right. Let's, I wanted to share with you oh, there's a light. Right. Oh, I don't know if JNR is a contraction of junior in the UK. Somebody look that up and give us the answer, okay? Somebody Google that. No, I'm serious, I wondered that too. And I was like, oh, I wonder if we can ever find out. We can, somebody Google it. Let me show you, ooh, thank you, Ted. All right. Just what we tell the students, right? Look it up. Let us now take a quick look at something. I want to share with you this resource that I'll email out to all of you, but I want you to, and I'll have this on our website. You may have seen something similar to this. So a while ago, I created a quick reference guide for how to spot conspiracy theories, and with the help of someone on my team, made it a little bit nicer. And this is really relevant to what we're dealing with right now. The whole issue of having stuff pulled off Twitter because it's misinformation. A lot of folks are confused by that and feel like maybe it shouldn't have been pulled down. So how folks on this phone call, folks that are media literate, tend to like spot really blatant misinformation kind of quickly and be like, of course, that's misinformation. This is terrible. But we also take for granted the reasons why it's easy for us to spot that. And because we take that for granted, sometimes it's hard to relay to somebody who's new to evaluating information how they should go about evaluating that information if it's just kind of second nature or inherent to us. Okay, so, ooh, you just watched that conspiracy theory video from Advantes. Yay! Okay, well, this is based on this, and this is a nicer infographic. Okay, I'll go through it really quickly, but a lot of these are in that video from those America's Frontline Doctors, which I think their website was registered 12 days ago. 8 ways, so it's not just 6 ways, it's 8 ways critical thinkers know when a news story is unreliable, disreputable, or embarrassing to share. So we took we don't have the words conspiracy theory in here because that can be off-putting, but it explicitly states that it is telling the truth and or everyone else is lying to you. So that's in there in this this doctor video. Okay, we know the truth. This is definitely true. Like that's what the media or government or corporations are hiding from you. So your logic should tell you that if they have to preface it by swearing it's true, it's probably not. Okay, it contains short conclusory opinion statements. So the closest thing in this video would be like, there is a cure for COVID and you don't need masks. That sounds pretty extreme and certain for medical information. Most doctors don't talk with that kind of certainty. Yes, you can use this for your classes. It's not on our website yet, but I'll email it to you and it will be on our website. Okay, so real journalists typically don't write like this. Also, real doctors usually don't talk like this. Not that she's not a real doctor, but like most reputable doctors don't go around being like, there's a cure and all the doctors are lying to you. That's usually not how it goes. Okay. It's organized as a list of questions or hypotheses. All right, so this was not so much I don't think this was a hallmark of that particular video, but that happens a lot. So okay, it's number 3. I ask questions and use hypotheses all the time. This is what scientists do. I wonder if there's not a better way to state. So what I mean is that the conspiracy theory itself will be organized as just a list of questions and hypotheses with no answers attached to it. So that does a couple things. You may have seen this format on Facebook posts. Like people will say, you know, here's some things you should be asking yourself. How come the government covered up COVID-19? How come Bill Gates is a computer geek, is all of a sudden interested in vaccines? Why can you go to the grocery store but not church? And like 80 more questions like that, right? So it's meant to be like overwhelming, you know, hard to debunk because there's just like so many of them. A lot of the premises for the questions themselves are illegitimate. Like that's just a format of a lot of misinformation out there, okay? So I don't mean that in general, like something with questions in it, but if with questions in it is bad, but if like it's mostly questions and no answers, that's not news. News is answers, not questions. Okay. Notice that that happens in like partisan MSNBC or Fox or CNN. They'll sneak the questions in there and be like, I wonder why they did this. That sounds shady. That's not news. Okay. All right. Puts the burden on you to answer the questions. Yes. If you can't really answer these questions, do you really know what happened? It asks you to prove a negative, which is often impossible. Like no one has proved that the government wasn't involved. Like they say it was X, but how do you know it wasn't Y? So it's not a good argument. Don't try it in court, because like proving a negative requires you to prove like everything else, right? And usually this is just a tactic. So there's a follow-up video by this this doctor saying that like, well, if the premise of it was her saying, well, if hydroxychloroquine isn't a cure, why doesn't everybody like Dr. Fauci and Chris Cuomo from CNN take a urine test and give me the results to show me they're not on hydroxychloroquine, right? So like asking, like putting the burden of proof on of like a ridiculous accusation on the target of the accusation. That's a red flag too. Think of a similar conspiracy theory, like Barack Obama was not born in the United States. Like, well, if he was born in the United States, he should just produce his birth certificate. And often that's just it's just a tactic, because after a while, Barack Obama was like, fine, here's my birth certificate. And they're like, well, that's easy for you to say. That's a short form birth certificate. We need the long form birth certificate. Whatever that is. And so like it doesn't matter what kind of level of proof you provide. It could be like, well, the birth certificate was forged, or there's no arguing with a conspiracy theorist. Okay. All right. It suggests an insidious plot by someone, like the media, like a big someone, the media, elites, corporations, government, but doesn't say exactly what the plot is or provide any evidence for it. This is the big one. Elevates the credibility of one expert who goes against consensus of their entire expert peer group, like one scientist versus all the other scientists, or like these couple of doctors versus all of the other doctors. So your logic should tell you if 1 out of 1,000 doctors says one thing contrary to the 999, the 999 likely didn't get together in order to trick you. Okay. And then this often follows misinformation. So claims that being taken down for promoting misinformation is censorship, which therefore proves that the item taken down is actually true. Okay, so you can, I'll send this out to everyone. I want to leave some time for questions. I'll stay a little bit after 7 o'clock, but have at it. Take yourself off mute if you got some, and I will, I'll go back through this list to see if there's any that I missed. Questions? I'm sure you guys have some more questions. If you like to chat in the chat box. All right.
Okay, question. I'll give you one.
Go for it.
This isn't going to be well formulated because I haven't really thought it through, but there seems to be a distinction, or at least in this polarized environment, it never used to be that a piece of information, medical, for example, in and of itself, was necessarily political. And I don't know that it necessarily is, or is healthy. I mean, I would say it's certainly not healthy that we rate things right or left depending on the potential for medical veracity or that sort of thing. It's just this is new territory for at
Mm-hmm.
least many of us.
Mm-hmm. It is.
And so I wonder if we should be rating right or left based on something that's actually like a fact. Do you see where I'm going with this? I'm not expressing it well.
I do. So I understand your like frustration, concern, because if it's a fact, it's a fact. Like what? How is it left or right? So that's why we have two. It's important to have the two axes. It's important to have reliability, and it's important to have left right. So what we're trying to when we categorize something as left and right, we're categorizing it as left and right as it is in the United States right now, not as it should be. So, you
Okay.
know, so I know, uh, because and keep in mind that what we agree upon as facts is just a very precious, small amount of things that we all like really, truly agree upon, right? Like things that like we all accept as a truth. There's a lot of us.
There's
There's
there's nothing. There's nothing.
Right, right. And you can only get like going back to like the early reliability videos. If you can get to like 90+% consensus, that's like a thing that's you consider true, right? For the purposes of rating it, right? Um, consensus of like so like uh, what I mean by there are very few things that we tend to all agree on as facts are things like the score of the baseball game last night was 7-2. It is raining outside right now on me. Like you and your neighbors can come to that agreement. Like the Earth is round,
No,
right?
we don't. No, with all due respect, we
Exact
don't all agree on that.
Exactly. So the things that we all agree on are just baseball in the rain. Everything else is like subject to like some people believe and some people don't, right? Which is disconcerting. So like flat earth, so like baseball in the rain, we agree on. Flat earth, oh, there's a few people that don't, right? So there's a few people. So for our purposes, we'll call that fact, right? And that's right up there with like climate change is man-made, right? So there is, but there's more disagreement on that even in the United States than, one might wish there were. But that's how it is, right? So we're not rating the facts as like, we're not rating the left and right as to like what should be left and right. Like what should be left and right is what should be just like the fact that most folks agree on is a thing that can be provable, like through argument, through science, through reason. Like if we all went through the same like process of reasoning together and arrived at a good conclusion about like the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine, it would be that there is a lot to be learned about it. There are some mixed results. They have changed over time, and like there would be some kind of there would be like a complicated a long form answer to like what is the truth about hydroxychloroquine. The truth wouldn't be like it's great or it will kill you all the time. Like it wouldn't be just binary like that, right? It would be this answer. However, in the United States, people have chosen left and right positions around that answer, right? So if that is the truth, people have formed like a left and right divide. So hydroxychloroquine is the greatest thing ever, and everyone should take it prophylactically. It's like a super right wing position in our country for some reason, and like no hydroxychloroquine. This answer that's like somewhat complex is like a center left position, oddly, which is weird. Yes, true. A binary culture is not good for the truth. None of this is good for the truth, right? So again, like the people get upset with the fact that like we rate the left right spectrum on like what the US left right spectrum is today. um, but that's what it is, and that's what we got to measure it against, right? Maybe that's not what it should be, but that's not all we're trying to do is like rate the media in this space, right? The work to you know make our and this is just part of the work that needs to be done to get more folks on the same page in our society.
Vanessa, can I make a point?
Interesting. Oh, sorry, you go, David.
Yeah, I see bias as, I'd use a synonym and say it's distortion. So, I mean, when we talk about veracity, I mean, we can all evaluate how reasonable an argument is and how true something is and how much it can be spread to, in other situations. But in terms of things being a distortion, when we had the Ebola virus, there wasn't any question about whether or not it was a hoax or something, or how you treated it or something like that. What's happened is a political party has determined that this is a chew toy, and we're going to use this as a proxy for, this is freedom. You know, if you believe in freedom, you won't wear a mask. And so to me, when I see bias, I see distortion. I see the word distortion. And when I see something that says that it's neutral, I'm seeing that all I have to worry about is how much of it is true, as opposed to how much they're trying to pull me in a direction so that I can support some tribe.
Yep, absolutely. So like the reliability and the bias, they're correlated. They're not, but there are independent concerns for each one, which is why we rate both. And you're going to get into these discussions in your classroom, and I think these are great discussions to have. You know, what is truth? This this big existential questions, like it's very philosophical, and you're gonna have your students really think critically about this. It's not just, and it's going to be more complicated than what we learn is true or false when we first come across a concept in like second grade or whatever, right? Like the sky is George Washington was the first president. Is that a fact? Yes. Abraham, that's true. Abraham Lincoln was the first president. That is false. Oh, yay, we figured out true and false. No, it's like way, 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 way squishier than that. Same thing with like, fact versus opinion. So fact is, the sky is blue during the day. Opinion is, I like broccoli. It's not always that clear cut. It's often something in the middle. So getting your students comfortable with all the squishiness, this is a practice of critical thinking. This is hard for people to engage in. It's hard for adults to engage in. That's why we're just like, nope. I'm just gonna pick a side, and everything that my side says, there's too many issues to think about. I'm just gonna, go down the line, is straight ticket vote, that kind of thing.
Vanessa?
All right. Yes.
Can I make mention, the one thing that I am figuring out in attending these seminars is that just because something skews right or left, it doesn't make them bad or good.
Right.
It depends on your perspective if you're going to see them as pro or con. But in reality, they're both right because it comes from perspective. So isn't it important maybe to teach young people to start with verifying the facts, that are the things that are stated as fact? There are things that can't be proven, and there are things that are squishy, but there are a lot of things where, like, so-and-so said something or wrote something that can be proven, they did or they didn't. And that kids should learn early on. As soon as you find that the supposed fact underneath the rest of the situation, that automatically throws the rest of it in question. Even though there might be some interesting little bits in the conversation, the fact that they used a falsehood that should have been proven before they opened their mouths puts a certain amount of doubt on the credibility of anything else they have to say.
Absolutely. And fact checking is a super important part of this media literacy universe. I don't focus on it because there are fact-checking organizations, right? I don't focus on it for a couple of reasons. One, because not everything is fact-checkable, and because like the work of fact-checking is like done by journalists, and like there are things that are fact-checkable and you can track down, right? Things that are in Snopes and PolitiFact and Pointer, and there's another one, factcheck.org. They're excellent organizations, and this is the work of real journalists. This is a slightly different endeavor. That is super important. And like when there's something that you can run down as a fact, you should also, oh yeah, righteous mind is excellent. You should run that fact down and teach your students that there are checkable things, and like there's a truth that can be found out about a lot of stuff. Like there's a truth that can be found out about, is there a cure for COVID? There is a truth that can be found out about the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine. That is why this video was taken down, because that was something that you could draw a line in the sand about. Okay. However, a lot of our content that we read doesn't fall into fact checkable territory. So that's why we deal with the other stuff about reliability and bias, and it's why we can't run everything to ground, but we still have to be able to, in a short period of time, reasonably determine whether something's likely to be true or false. Okay, that's what this exercise is for. All right, I have to get going, so we'll take one more question. Polly?
Okay, so this is a little bit of background, just kind of fill me in on your thinking on this. Mm-hmm. So the grayscale, right? Mm-hmm. I talk to my students a lot about the grayscale. And prior to the 2016 election, my personal thinking was that, the left and the right have very similar issues, right? If you listed them all out, they'd have almost the same issues, mm-hmm. except they prioritize them differently. Mm-hmm. That's kind of been my thinking. Now we're so far from reality, because somebody wrote it before. It's not just what Trump's doing; it's that the followers are buying into it, mm-hmm. and propelling it forward. And now we're so far off this, the grayscale. Mm-hmm. But is there validity? Would you agree that there's validity to that we basically have the same issues, except we're approaching it very differently? Not just our perspectives, but also our priorities of it.
Like, you mean our values? Like we have the same values?
Yeah, like gun control. I think that everybody's concerned about guns. I don't think mm-hmm. anybody's all about, shooting up the schools and all the come from gun violence. But then how do you deal with it? Mm-hmm. And some are prioritizing gun rights over the safety, right? Mm-hmm. But everybody agrees that it's pretty much a problem.
Right, like we have shared values, but we have different focuses. I do think that there's validity to that. So like when it comes to guns, like the kind of underlying need that we all have is like everyone wants to be safe, right? They want them so they want safety. And whether you may be, but that may mean you prioritize, you want yourself to be safe first and foremost. And in that case, you'd be like, well, if everyone's got guns, I need a gun, right? Or you may prioritize like the safety of everyone, right? And if that's the case, then you might prioritize like, okay, well, let's reduce the amount of guns, right? So, but yeah, we tend to get polarized. Like when we polarize, we dehumanize, we vilify the other side, and then it becomes like harder to see that we do share like this underlying fundamental value of safety. And then we accuse the other side of just not wanting that. We're like, well, you just must want to kill everyone, and like that's, for most people, that's not the case, right? So, all right, I do have to go, but thank you so much for participating, and I will see you on the next session. We'll go through some in-class lesson plan ideas, and we'll take more questions. Okay? Thanks all. Bye.
Hi, Vanessa. Thanks for everything.